Hi everyone. I've got a question on Instagram from one of my friends, Eric Kaplan, who you might know as one of the writers from Big Bang Theory, Futurama, lots of other stuff, loads of stuff. I've spoken to Eric in some depth about philosophy. We did a podcast, and he's very, very good with this stuff. He always has cutting, insightful questions. So he replied to one of my videos asking this, and he said, what's the cash value of self versus no self when it comes to worshipping a god? In real life, Buddhists worship gods, true, or worship the historical Buddha as a god, sometimes too, true. And Hindus do too, obviously. Does the metaphysics of whether they really exist have any practical consequence? So this is a really good question. And I think actually for a lot of people, no. It doesn't have a practical consequence. It's a bit like the scholastic systems in early Christianity. So they exist, but they exist mainly for the monastic classes of the priests. And the lay people tend not to bother with them. So for me, I think this raises more questions than I have answers. So we need to talk about the nature of the worship. So when they do worship, is it a relational act between two ultimately real entities, a god and a devotee, like it would be in like the Vishishta-Dvaita traditions, maybe the more theistic conceptions of Hindu thought? Is it a skillful means, upaya, to transcend duality? And I know Eric said to me a few months ago that it seems that we can get away with a lot under the umbrella term of upaya. I agree. Is it always appropriate? Maybe not. Is it a cop-out? Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. But the metaphysics, I think, are less important to lay people than they are to the priestly class, the philosophers, the clergy, whatever you want to call them, the Sangha, across religious traditions. So for the layperson, I think worship is of various types. I've said before that in some ways Buddhist worship isn't aimed at the same ends as worship of things like the Abrahamic faiths. So this worship doesn't aim at gaining grace for salvation, for example. But it also shares some fundamental factors. So what fundamental factors might they be? Pragmatic effects, things like psychological grounding. People worship, and you'll hear people talk about this a lot when they talk about worship and the influence that faith has in their lives, because it gives them some sort of emotional support, gives them structure, gives them a sense of meaning that's outside of themselves. They use it to orientate their morality, rightly or wrongly. You don't have to agree with that, but it's a fact. Devotion can reinforce ethical behaviour through reverence. So seeing the Buddha as a powerful figure who got things right, who thought about things in the right way, and who had things worthwhile to say, might make you more open to following what he had to say in an ethical perspective. It can provide community cohesion. And I think this is huge, actually, because religion is all about community. Rituals, shared worship, shared forms of reverence and of acknowledging that reverence bind communities and provide a sense of coherent identity. And another one is that I talk about quite a lot now from most religious traditions is the transformative practice. So I talked about this previously when I was talking about the similarity as I saw it between the church fathers, the hesychasts, and a Buddhist Sangha. And even if the gods aren't ultimately real, the devotion can cultivate certain mindsets and certain propensities that are beneficial. So bhakti, the devotional sense, love, humility, correct concentration, all these sorts of things I think are probably pragmatically useful. Further to that, what does the worship mean in a broader sense? Well, it might be literal, it might not be. So the God exists, doesn't matter if the God exists, it could be symbolic. where someone like the Buddha in particular represents qualities to be cultivated, qualities to be admired, in the same way that we might say one worships a footballer. Yeah? No one's saying that Robbie Fowler is literally God. He is. And it could be that this is all non-dual, so the God is not separate from the worshipper in an ultimate perspective. Okay? So metaphysics for this is important, but only to a degree. For the philosophy types like me, for the Sangha, for the priestly classes, for the scholasticism side of things, metaphysical clarity is huge. Like, it's super important. We want it all the time. For lay practitioners, I'm not convinced it's that important at all. The felt experience of worship, this sort of stuff, I think is often more significant than metaphysical wrangling, metaphysical jostling, abstractions. And I also think it's sort of the case that metaphysics might shape our broader narrative, but the actual practice shapes the life. So, is there any cash value between self versus no self when it comes to worshipping a god? Well, I think there can be, because you can worship a god in ways that do not presuppose an ultimate existence. Although Buddhists do think that deities can intervene, these deities do not enjoy ultimate existence. They are subject to karma, they are subject to rebirth, they are subject to samsara, and thus they are imperfect. Yeah, that's really important. And then the other side is, well, maybe they just don't think about that side of things at all. Maybe they do it unthinkingly. That's a cynical point of view. Maybe somebody enjoys Buddhism for the other side of things and the metaphysics isn't greatly significant to them at all. Maybe the overall ethical thrust is more important to them. Maybe it's about the way it makes them feel. Maybe it's about a sense of shared community. So there's a lot of things at play, and there's a lot of questions here that we can't really answer all in one go. It's not a tidy answer. So Eric, again, a fantastic question, which I've come to expect from you in the time I've known you now. You always pod and promote me in ways I don't really expect, and it's fab. And I suppose that kind of long-winded, wishy-washy non-answer is my answer.